she called the cops on me for parking on my own driveway. 6:47 a.m. 2 patrol cars, lights flashing, my muddy F-250 sitting on my concrete pad, fully on my property, and Connie Riedel standing on the sidewalk, arms crossed, wearing that smirk like she'd already won. When the officer stepped out, she pointed at me and said, "I pay your salary. Arrest him." Right there, I knew this wasn't about a truck blocking her view. This was about power, control, the kind of small-town tyranny that crushes good people every single day. But Connie made one mistake, one critical miscalculation. She had no idea I'm a lieutenant colonel in the US Army. 23 years dismantling threats a lot more dangerous than a suburban HOA dictator. My name is Vance Hartwig. Lieutenant Colonel, US Army Intelligence, 23 years active duty. I just transitioned to reserve status, and after 2 decades of living in base housing, moving every 18 months, sleeping in places where mortars were the alarm clock, I finally bought my first piece of real land. 4 acres in Pinewood Estates, Colorado. Trees, space, quiet. My wife, Marina, ICU nurse, tougher than half the soldiers I've commanded, was thrilled. Our son was at West Point, our daughter studying engineering at CU Boulder. This was supposed to be our chapter, the peaceful one. Every morning, I'd pour black coffee from my stainless percolator, step onto the porch, and just listen. The crunch of frost on gravel under my boots. The smell of pine resin mixing with diesel exhaust from my truck. Cold air that didn't taste like sand or burning oil. It was perfect for about 8 weeks. Pinewood Estates is 47 homes tucked into the hills outside Colorado Springs. A mix of retirees and young families with a voluntary HOA. No legal teeth, just a handful of people who like organizing block parties and arguing about mailbox colors. And then there's Connie Riedel, 52, vice president of the HOA, married to Garrett, a real estate attorney who's never home, no kids, lives in the biggest house on the corner lot with landscaping so perfect it looks like it was installed by a surgeon. Her lawn always smells like chemical fertilizer, sharp, acrid, the kind that burns your nostrils if you stand too close. And she does these evening patrols where she walks the neighborhood in heels that click on the asphalt like a countdown timer. She's one of those people who uses the HOA like a personal fiefdom where everything's about property values and community standards. But if you listen close, you realize it's just code. She's made comments about transient renters, that's the Hispanic family 3 doors down. And she calls the veterans' work van parked on the street clutter. You get the picture. 2 weeks after we moved in, Connie knocked on my door with a welcome packet, smiled, shook my hand, then waited while I flipped through it. She'd highlighted one section in yellow. Vehicles over £6,000 should be garaged or parked behind fence line. My truck is £6,400. I looked up and she was still smiling. Just a courtesy reminder, she said. We like to keep things tidy. I nodded, closed the door. Marina was watching from the kitchen. That woman's going to be a problem, she said. Maybe, I replied. But Marina gave me that look. The one that says you're too optimistic and it's going to bite you. She was right. 12 weeks in, I came back from a weekend drill covered in mud after running field exercises, live scenarios, 0 sleep, the kind of training that keeps you sharp. And my truck looked like it had been through a war zone because in a way it had. I parked it on my driveway, my paved concrete apron 10 feet from the street completely on my property, and planned to wash it that afternoon. Sunday morning, 7 a.m., Connie knocked. I opened the door mid-sip of coffee. That truck needs to be moved immediately, she said, pointing like it was a dead animal. It's an eyesore. I kept my voice level. It's on my property. I'll wash it this afternoon. Her face went red, not pink red. And she said, we'll see about that. Then turned and walked away with her heels clicking double time. Marina called from the kitchen. Told you. Monday morning, 6:45. I'm pouring my second coffee when I see the lights. Two sheriff's patrol cars rolling up slow and Connie standing on the sidewalk pointing at my truck like she's directing an air strike. The two deputies stepped out and I could see them doing the mental math before they even reached my porch. Young guys. Professional, probably mid-30s. The taller one, nameplate Red Kraus, spotted the military decal on my truck's rear window, then looked at me standing there in my Army PT shirt, and I watched his shoulders relax just a fraction. "Morning, sir," Kraus said. "We got a call about an illegally parked vehicle blocking access." He glanced at my truck, then at the wide open street, then back at me with this look that said he already knew this was a waste of his time. "On my own driveway," I said, keeping my tone even and friendly. Kraus sighed, pulled out his notepad, and walked over to check the property line, measured the distance from my truck to the street with his eyes, looked at the concrete pad, then turned to Connie, who was still standing on the sidewalk with her arms crossed like a school principal waiting for detention to start. "The vehicle is entirely on private property," Kraus called over. "There's no violation here." Connie's voice carried across the yard, sharp and indignant. "I want a report filed. He's violating covenant standards. This is a voluntary community and he's refusing to comply." Kraus walked back to me and I could see him fighting the urge to roll his eyes. "Sir, we're going to clear this as unfounded. Have a good day." He handed me a card with the incident number, nodded, and headed back to his car. As they pulled away, I felt that familiar sensation, the prickle of adrenaline at the base of my skull, the same feeling I get 30 seconds before a mission briefing when you know the intel's about to get complicated. That evening, my inbox pinged with an email from Dale Peaton, the HOA president, 68, retired insurance adjuster, the kind of guy who'd apologize for winning a poker hand. Subject line: courtesy reminder, vehicle placement. The body was pure corporate vagueness about community aesthetics and voluntary compliance, but Dale had CC'd the entire street, 18 households total. Marina read it over my shoulder and said she's building a paper trail. She was right. So I replied to all, kept it short and factual, cited my property survey, noted there was no enforceable covenant according to county records, and attached a PDF of my plat map showing the property lines clear as day. Next morning, I walked out to grab the newspaper and found an orange traffic cone sitting right at the edge of my driveway. Not mine. I checked my security camera footage from overnight, and there it was. 11 p.m. A silver Lexus sedan pulled up. Passenger door opened. Garrett Riedel stepped out, placed the cone, got back in, drove off. Took him 40 seconds. I picked up the cone, walked 3 houses down, and set it on Connie's pristine porch with a handwritten note underneath. "Believe you dropped this." V. Marina saw me walking back and just shook her head. "You're poking the bear," she said. "Bear poked first," I replied. That afternoon, a county code enforcement truck pulled into my driveway and out stepped Raul Espinosa, mid-40s, wearing a county polo shirt and the expression of a man who'd seen every stupid neighbor dispute known to mankind. "Mr. Hartwick, got a complaint about unpermitted grading work on your property. You do any earth moving recently?" I shook my head, bought it as is 8 months ago. "Haven't touched the grading." Raul walked my property line, checked the drainage, looked at the slopes, then came back shaking his head. "Man, I'm sorry. This is the 5th bogus call I've gotten from this street this month alone. Somebody's got way too much time on their hands." I offered him coffee and we stood on the porch for 10 minutes while he vented. And that's when he gave me something I hadn't considered. "You know," Raul said, lowering his voice. "You can request your own property inspection report from the county for $15. Shows every complaint ever filed against your address going back years. I've seen guys in situations like yours use it to prove harassment patterns if things go sideways." He wrote down the department number on the back of his card. I filed the request that same afternoon. $15 felt like the best money I'd spend all year. 3 days later, I started noticing cars slowing down in front of my house. People I'd never met giving my property the once-over like they were casing it for a heist. Turned out Connie had been busy with a petition. Voluntary Covenant Enforcement Initiative, going door to door, collecting signatures and framing the whole thing as protecting property values in the neighborhood. By the end of the week, she had 11 signatures out of 47 homes, mostly retirees who didn't know the details. Then the anonymous letter showed up in my mailbox. No stamp, no return address, just a single sheet of printer paper with a message in Times New Roman. Military types think they're above the rules. Sell and move to base housing where you belong. Marina found it when she got home from her hospital shift, and I watched her face go from confused to furious in about 3 seconds flat. I took the paper, held it up to the light, and caught the faintest scent of lavender, that distinctive, expensive hand lotion Connie wore everywhere. I slipped it into a plastic sleeve and filed it in my growing folder of documentation. The following Tuesday, Marina came home from her night shift at the ICU, shaking with a kind of anger I hadn't seen from her in years. Her car had gotten a parking ticket while she was working, parked legally on the street in a 2-hour zone that lifted restrictions after 6 p.m. But somehow she got cited anyway. She fought it, got it dismissed within 48 hours because it was obviously bogus. Then 3 days later, her hospital received an anonymous phone call reporting that an ICU nurse on the night shift was showing up to work intoxicated. The hospital had to investigate. Mandatory policy, zero tolerance. And even though Marina was cleared within hours after a blood test and supervisor interviews, the humiliation of being pulled off the floor and questioned in front of her colleagues left her devastated. She came home that morning, still in her scrubs, and just stood in our kitchen with tears running down her face. She went after my job, Vance, Marina said quietly. She called my hospital and tried to get me fired. I felt my jaw tighten in that way it does when I'm making decisions, and Marina recognized the look immediately. I need to make some calls, I said. Marina just nodded, poured herself tea, and said, burn her down. I reached out to Captain Lynette Torren, an old JG buddy who'd helped me navigate a landlord dispute 2 years earlier. Lynette picked up on the second ring, listened to the whole story without interrupting, then said, okay, first, your neighbor's an idiot. Second, if she's making false reports to your wife's employer, that's called tortious interference, and you could sue her into next Tuesday if you wanted. But Lynette's real advice was simpler. Document everything and create an official paper trail. File a harassment report with the sheriff, she said. Courts love timelines. If this woman escalates, you'll have dated evidence showing a pattern, and that's gold. I filed the report the next morning with Deputy Krause, same guy from the driveway call, and this time he took it seriously, made notes, asked good questions, told me they'd flag it in their system. Then Lynette mentioned something I'd never considered. HOAs registered as non-profits have to make their financial records public in Colorado. Costs like $50 and takes 2 weeks. But I've seen cases where board members were using association funds like personal piggy banks. If there's funny money, that's your leverage. I submitted the request that same afternoon. 2 weeks later, Connie called an emergency HOA meeting and pressured Dale into sending out the notice with exactly 24 hours advance warning. 19 neighbors showed up anyway, mostly out of curiosity because the agenda was vague. Connie had prepared a full slideshow, which she projected onto the community center wall. And for the next 15 minutes, we all sat there watching her click through photos of my truck from various angles. She argued for implementing voluntary fines of $100 per violation and hiring private security to patrol the neighborhood on weekends. I was sitting in the back row, arms crossed, just watching her perform. About halfway through, Marcus Tillman raised his hand. He's a postal worker, early 50s, lives for houses down. Connie, Marcus said, voice calm but firm. This feels personal. His truck's parked on his own property. Why do we care? Connie's face went tight and she said, because people like him don't respect community standards. And the way she said people like him landed in the room like a grenade. The temperature dropped about 20 degrees. Dale cleared his throat nervously and said, maybe we should table this discussion for another time. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with Marina and went through the HOA financial records that had arrived 3 days earlier. It didn't take long to spot the problems. Connie had been billing administrative expenses totaling $8,400 over 18 months. Receipts were vague, just line items like office supplies, consulting fees, and community outreach materials. One entry jumped out immediately. $1,200 paid to Garrett's law firm for covenant review services. Marina, who'd spent 15 years managing ICU budgets, circled 3 entries in red pen. "This is self-dealing," she said. "Non-profits can't pay board members or their families without full board approval and disclosure. If she didn't get a vote on this, it's fraud." The next morning, Marcus caught me at the mailbox and walked over with his hands in his pockets. "I've lived here 9 years, Marcus said finally. Connie's run off 3 families that I know of. Always finds a reason. But it's never the white folks." "You noticed that?" He told me she'd filed noise complaints against him for loud music, even though he doesn't own speakers. She'd called animal control on the Hispanic family, claiming their beagle was a vicious dog. She'd reported the veterans' work van as an abandoned vehicle 3 times. "If you're building something to push back," Marcus said, "count me in. I'm tired of watching good people leave because one woman thinks she runs the neighborhood." I couldn't sleep that night. So around 2 a.m., I found myself at the kitchen table with my laptop, digging through public county records. I started with Connie and Garrett's address, pulled up their property record, and sat staring at the screen for a full minute trying to process what I was seeing. $47,000 in unpaid property tax liens going back 2 years with foreclosure proceedings that had been paused due to a hardship application they'd filed 6 months ago. I cross-referenced with court records and found a malpractice settlement from 8 months earlier where Garrett's law firm had paid out $230,000 to a client they'd screwed over. And suddenly the whole picture snapped into focus. Connie wasn't obsessed with property values because she cared about the neighborhood. She was terrified that her own financial collapse would drag down home prices and expose her as a fraud. Marina came downstairs in her bathrobe, poured herself a glass of water, and saw me staring at the laptop screen. "You found something," she said. I turned the screen so she could see the tax lien document. "She's broke," I said. "The house is underwater. Garrett's firm is bleeding money, and she's been running a shell game to distract everyone from the fact that she's about 6 months from losing everything." Over the next week, I started making small, deliberate moves. I parked my truck prominently in the driveway every single day, washed and waxed. I installed a flagpole in my front yard, perfectly within code, exactly 6 feet from the property line, and flew an American flag that I raised at dawn and lowered at dusk. I even added a decorative boulder near the property line position so it was perfectly visible from Connie's kitchen window every morning. Every single thing I did was completely legal, properly permitted where necessary, and designed to assert one simple fact. This was my property. Within 3 days, I could see her pacing her driveway on the phone, gesturing wildly. 2 days after I installed the flagpole, Marcus showed up at my door with a 6-pack of beer. "I talked to Yolanda Sims and Gil Farnsworth," he said. "They want in on whatever you're planning because Connie's been after them, too." We met at my kitchen table the following Saturday morning. The 4 of us drinking coffee while Marina took notes. And what emerged was a pattern so obvious I was surprised nobody had connected the dots before. The plan came together over the next hour like a military operation. First step was filing a formal complaint with the Colorado Secretary of State about the HOA's financial irregularities. Marcus volunteered to file the complaint. Second step was requesting a special HOA meeting, which the bylaws allowed if 20% of homeowners petitioned for it. We needed 10 signatures out of 47 homes. We already had 4 people in my kitchen. Gil knew 5 neighbors who couldn't stand Connie, and Yolanda promised to talk to 3 more families. Third step was preparing a presentation for that meeting. Just facts, no emotion, no personal attacks, laying out the financial mismanagement. Fourth step was inviting media because the local paper loved writing about HOA abuse stories. The week before the scheduled HOA meeting, I woke up at 5:30 a.m. like always, started the coffee, walked outside to grab the newspaper, and immediately knew something was wrong because my truck was sitting lower than it should have been. All 4 tires slashed, clean cuts through the sidewalls, the kind of damage that's deliberate and personal. I pulled out my phone, reviewed the security camera footage, and there it was. 2:17 a.m. A figure in a dark hoodie approaching from the street, kneeling by each tire, working quickly, then disappearing. The footage was clear enough to see the person's height and the way they moved, but the face was obscured. I filed a police report within the hour and Deputy Kraus showed up. He watched the footage, made notes, took photos of the slashed tires, and said what I already knew. Height and gait are consistent with your neighbor, but without a clear face shot, we can't make charges stick. I handed him a printed timeline of every incident over the past 4 months. Keep this documentation, he said. If she escalates again, and I think she will, you'll have everything you need for a restraining order at minimum. 3 days later, the smear campaign started. Someone created a fake Facebook profile called Concerned Pinewood Resident and started posting in the neighborhood group claiming that a new neighbor was an aggressive military type who threatened families, surveilled children with cameras, and had a history of violent behavior. The posts were vague enough to avoid direct libel, but specific enough that everyone knew they were talking about me. Yolanda caught it first, took screenshots of everything before the posts got deleted, and called me immediately. That evening, my son called from West Point. Dad, someone tagged me in a Facebook post saying you're threatening people in your neighborhood. What's going on? I explained the situation, and he was quiet for a moment before saying, you always told me to document everything and let the truth speak for itself. Are you doing that? I smiled despite everything. I am, I said. And when this is over, I'm going to show you exactly how we handled it. The special HOA meeting was in 2 days. 3 days before the meeting, Dale sent out an email at 10 p.m. on a Sunday night with the subject line meeting postponed indefinitely. I read it twice, felt my jaw tighten, and immediately called Dale's cell phone. Dale, who told you to cancel the meeting? I asked. There was a long pause. Connie said there were legal concerns, Dale finally stammered. Garrett reviewed the bylaws and advised that we might be exposing the board to liability. I cut him off. Dale, the bylaws require you to hold a special meeting within 14 days of receiving a valid petition. We gave you 11 signatures. If you don't hold this meeting, any homeowner can sue the board for breach of fiduciary duty. Fine, he said quietly. Thursday 7 p.m. Community Center. Thursday arrived with the kind of nervous energy that reminded me of pre-mission briefings. By 6:30 p.m. the community center parking lot was already filling up. 41 of the 47 homeowners had RSVP'd. Inside, the room smelled like burnt coffee mixed with the sharp chemical scent of floor wax. Connie had arrived early and set up a table at the front with stacks of her own packets. She was wearing a navy blazer and pearls, her hair perfect. Garrett sat beside her, looking uncomfortable, scrolling through his phone. Deputy Kraus was there too, standing in the back corner in uniform. Jenna Carlson from the Pinewood Gazette sat in the back row with a notepad and a digital recorder. Dale called the meeting to order with a trembling hand on the gavel. This special meeting has been called pursuant to Article 7, Section 3 of the HOA bylaws to address concerns raised by multiple homeowners regarding board governance and financial management, Dale said. Miss Riedel, as the petitioner who called for enforcement actions, you have the floor first. Connie stood and launched into a prepared statement about volunteer board members who work tirelessly for the community, only to be attacked by newcomers who don't understand the neighborhood's values. Marcus stood up before Connie had even finished her second paragraph. Point of order, Marcus said loudly. She's lying, and everyone in this room knows it. The room erupted in scattered gasps and murmurs. Dale banged his gavel twice. Connie's face went pale and then red. Excuse me, she said, her voice rising. I am a volunteer board member who has dedicated. Marcus cut her off. You've dedicated for years to harassing people who don't fit your idea of what this neighborhood should look like, and we're done pretending otherwise. I stood up calm and deliberate. Dale looked at me helplessly. Mr. Hartwig, you called this meeting, so you have the floor. I walked to the front carrying a cardboard box filled with spiral-bound dossiers, and I started handing them out row by row while the room watched in complete silence. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Vance Hartwig, U.S. Army Reserve, I said. I've spent 23 years serving this country. I moved to Pinewood Estates 8 months ago because I wanted peace and quiet. Instead, I've been systematically harassed. My wife's career has been threatened. And my property has been vandalized. All because one person decided that my truck and my job didn't meet her standards. I clicked the remote and the projector screen behind me lit up with the first slide, a timeline starting with Connie's welcome packet running through the false police calls, the code enforcement complaints, the anonymous letter, the hospital report about Marina, and ending with photos of my slashed tires. This isn't about community standards, I said. This is about abuse of power. The room was dead silent now. I advanced to the financial record slide showing $8,400 in unexplained administrative expenses and the $1,200 payment to Garrett's law firm. The HOA bylaws require board members to disclose any payments to family members and get a conflict of interest vote from the full board, I said. According to the meeting minutes posted online, no such vote ever occurred, which means Miss Riedel has been funneling association funds to her husband's failing law firm without authorization. Connie's voice cracked. This is slander. Garrett, do something. But Garrett just sat there looking at his phone. Connie, stop talking. Please, just stop talking. The room erupted in whispers and conversations. I held up my hand and the room quieted down. I filed a formal complaint with the Colorado Secretary of State's nonprofit division this morning, I said. They'll be conducting an audit. But that's not why we're here tonight. I turned to face the room. We're here because you elected a board to serve this community. And instead, they've been serving themselves and using HOA rules as weapons against anyone they don't like. I paused. I move for an immediate recall vote of the entire board, effective immediately with new elections to be held within 30 days. A woman in the third row raised her hand. I second that motion. Dale went through the procedures mechanically, called for discussion, and when nobody spoke, he called for the vote. All in favor of recalling the current board. 38 hands went up. Connie stood abruptly, grabbed her purse, and walked toward the door with Garrett following behind her. The sound of the metal door slamming echoed through the community center like a gavel striking wood, final and irreversible. After the meeting ended, Jenna Carlson caught me by my truck. What do you want people to know about what happened here tonight? She asked. HOAs aren't inherently bad, I said. They serve a purpose, but unchecked power corrupts, and when board members start using their position to settle personal scores instead of serving the community, homeowners need to get involved, ask questions, and demand transparency. This isn't about rank or training. It's about doing what's right and not backing down when someone tries to bully you into silence. Anyone could have done what I did. They just needed to be willing to put in the work and trust that the truth matters. The new board was elected the following week. Marcus won the presidency with 42 votes. Yolanda became treasurer, and Gil took the secretary position. The state audit came back 3 weeks later confirming everything I documented. $8,400 in improperly documented expenses, $1,200 in unauthorized payments to a board member's family, and a recommendation that the previous board members reimburse the association. Connie and Garrett quietly listed their house for sale 2 days after the audit report went public, and they were gone within 60 days, selling for $30,000 under asking price. The new board's first act was to dissolve the voluntary fines and redirect the HOA's energy toward actual community building. Quarterly barbecues, a holiday lights contest, and a real neighborhood watch program focused on actual safety. Marcus proposed creating the Pinewood Unity Scholarship, $500 a year for a local high school student pursuing public service careers. The first fundraiser was a pancake breakfast that drew 43 families and raised $2,100. 6 months after everything settled down, my son graduated from West Point. At the ceremony, he pulled me aside and said, "Dad, remember when Connie was posting those things about you online, and I called worried? You told me that courage isn't loud. It's methodical and patient and lets the truth do the talking." I think about that every day. That might have been the proudest moment of my life. We hosted a dinner at our house after graduation. Marina's cooking, our daughter home from college, and we invited Marcus and his family, Gil, Yolanda, and her daughter, and even the new neighbors who'd bought Connie's old house. My truck sat in the driveway washed and waxed and nobody said a word about it because it wasn't a problem anymore. It was just a truck. And that's exactly how it should have been from the beginning. So if you're dealing with your own HOA nightmare right now, the board member who thinks they run the neighborhood, the busybody who files complaints about everything you do, the petty tyrant who uses rules as weapons, drop your story in the comments below. And if you love watching bullies get outsmarted by people who refuse to back down, hit that subscribe button. Remember, quiet professionalism beats loud tyranny every single time.